Long ago, in a land of rolling hills and winding rivers, there emerged a small gathering of villages along the banks of the Tiber. These were humble places, clay brick huts, fields of wheat, and people living simple lives, but they carried within them the seeds of greatness. For centuries, myths and legends grew around these lands. Among these stories, one stood out, the myth of twin brothers, Romulus and Remus. According to tale, they were descendants of Aeneas, the Trojan hero who escaped the fall of Troy and travelled across the Mediterranean to found what would someday be Rome. It was said that these twins were born of divine blood, left adrift on the waters of the Tiber River. A she-wolf, a legendary creature of strength and cunning, was believed to have rescued them, nursing the infants with fierce devotion. As they grew older, the brothers dreamed of founding a city, each believing they had the divine right to lead. Their rivalry led to a fierce debate about where to build their new home, a debate that ultimately ended in tragedy and legend. The story says Romulus and Remus quarrelled over the chosen site, and Romulus, in a moment of divine rage, or perhaps fate, killed his brother. Romulus then went on to establish the city of Rome upon a series of hills, laying its first stones and marking its land with the first walls. The city, he claimed, would be a place of strength, resilience, and divine favour, traits that the Romans would treasure deeply. But legends are layered over reality. Archaeologists, using tools of science and discovery, found that long before Romulus, the land was inhabited by diverse peoples, Latins, Sabines, and Etruscans, all vying for control and influence. These peoples had their own customs, their gods, and their stories, shaping the cultural landscape of early Italy. Over time, small villages along the river began to merge, forming more organized settlements. The Romans built simple roads and basic defenses, but these early communities were still loose confederations, clumps of farmers and workers united by necessity rather than law. Yet there was something about this place, a sense of destiny that called the people to more than simple survival. Throughout the centuries that followed, stories of divine kings and heroic founders persisted. These stories, part history and part myth, served as the moral fabric of Roman identity. They told of a city born not just of stone and mud, but of divine will and heroic virtue. The legendary Romulus was seen as the father of the city, an emblem of strength, leadership, and divine favor. As Rome's small forces fought neighboring tribes, Etruscans to the north, Volsci and Aequi from the mountains, the young city learned the art of war. It developed disciplined armies and ingenious tactics. It built the earliest roads, linking its hills to surrounding lands, transforming scattered villages into a growing confederation of peoples tied together by shared customs, laws, and stories. Through it all, the story of Rome's beginning remained alive. Tales of divine favor, heroic struggle, and resilience. These stories were the soul of Rome, uniting its people and giving them purpose. For even as the city grew stronger, these legends reminded every Roman that their city's foundation was not just built on stone, but on divine inspiration, an unbreakable bond between myth and reality. Centuries of small settlements, mythic kings, and divine stories had laid the foundation, but Rome's story took a dramatic turn around 509 BC. Up until that moment, the city was ruled by kings, powerful, often semi-divine figures who shaped its early laws and traditions. And these kings, especially the last, Tarquin the Proud, had begun to rule with unchecked authority, pushing the aristocratic elite and common citizens toward breaking point. The tipping point was fueled by outrage over Tarquin's tyranny, which peaked with the infamous story of Lucretia. She was a noblewoman known for her virtue and integrity, whose tragic fate after being assaulted by Tarquin's son became a rallying cry. Her death in despair inspired Roman noble families, artisans, and farmers to revolt against the monarchy. Led by the aristocrat Lucius Junius Brutus, they expelled Tarquin and his family from Rome, abolishing the monarchy forever. This upheaval was not just a political revolution, it was an upheaval of ideas. The Romans abolished kingship and set out to build a government based on shared power, collective responsibility, and civic duty. They established what came to be known as the Roman Republic, a radical idea at the time. Authority divided among elected officials rather than concentrated in a single ruler. The Republic introduced new political institutions. The consuls, elected annually, took executive charge but possessed limited power. They could veto each other, ensuring no one could dominate. The Senate, made of Rome's elite, aristocratic families, advised the consuls and controlled diplomacy, finance, and military campaigns. The popular assemblies, open to all Roman citizens, debated and voted on laws, giving the people a say in their governance, an innovative concept emphasizing participation and accountability. But governing a rapidly expanding state came with frequent unrest. The conflict of the orders emerged as the plebeians, common farmers, artisans, and soldiers began demanding political rights and protections. They felt excluded from power and economic opportunities, leading to protests, strikes, and civil disobedience. Over decades of struggle, they gained reforms such as the tribunes of the plebs, officials with the power to veto unfair laws, and access to elected magistracies. Meanwhile, Rome's military was growing stronger and more sophisticated. Early on, tribes and rival city-states still threatened the young republic. Rome faced fierce battles against the Etruscans in the north, who were skilled warriors and master engineers, building advanced walls, drainage systems, and city planning. The Etruscans, especially under leaders like Lars Porsena, had once threatened Rome's very existence. But Rome learned from each conflict, adapting their tactics, forging alliances, and strengthening their military discipline. Most consequential was the Roman conquest of the Latin League, an alliance of Latin villages and towns. It began with small skirmishes and culminated in the Latin War, which Rome won decisively. The Latin victory cemented Rome's leadership, and soon Roman laws and customs spread among their allies, transforming these groups into Roman citizens and soldiers. One of Rome's most significant developments was its mastery of engineering and military innovation, most famously exemplified during the Battle of Lake Regillus and later in wars against the Volsci, Aequi, and Samnites. The Samnites, fierce mountain fighters, became one of Rome's most formidable enemies, fighting multiple wars that tested Roman resilience. Romans developed the Manipular Legion, a flexible fighting force that could adapt quickly on the battlefield, and reaped victories that expanded their territory further. Despite military victories, internal struggles persisted. Rome's social fabric was strained. Patricians, the noble elite, battled to maintain control, while plebeians pushed for equality. The social fluctuations were reflected in their religion, art, and culture. Romans borrowed and adapted Greek art, and their religion increasingly unified various peoples under a shared divine authority, incorporating gods like Jupiter and Mars into their worldview. One influential figure in this era was Cincinnatus, a rustic farmer who famously became dictator during a crisis, led Rome to victory, and then voluntarily relinquished power, embodying Roman virtues of civic duty and humility. His story became a moral lesson for later generations about service and sacrifice. As Rome grew, it faced a key challenge, balancing expansion with stability. During the Socii Revolt, allied Italian tribes demanded greater independence, but were ultimately subdued through a series of brutal campaigns. These wars weren't just about conquest. They were about integrating diverse peoples into the Roman system, extending rights and spreading Latin culture. Throughout this period, the myths and stories of Rome's divine beginnings persisted, particularly the legend of Romulus, serving as guiding ideals, strength, resilience, and divine favor. These stories weren't just for entertainment, they reinforced a collective purpose, inspiring Romans to believe their city was predestined for greatness. Meanwhile, powerful figures emerged, military leaders, reformers, and statesmen who shaped the course of Rome's history. Men like Appius Claudius Caecus, who oversaw major infrastructure projects such as the Appian Way, the longest and most strategic road connecting Rome to southern Italy, and the censoring reforms that helped stabilize the expanding republic. These leaders wrestled with internal politics, balancing the rights of the aristocratic patricians and the increasingly assertive plebeians. The struggle for equality, known as the conflict of the orders, was arduous but vital. It led to the establishment of the plebeian tribune, which gave commoners their own officials with veto power, and gradually to political reforms that made the republic more inclusive. This was a time of remarkable cultural growth as well. The Romans borrowed heavily from Greek art and philosophy, adopting gods like Zeus and Athena into their own pantheon, rebranded as Jupiter and Minerva. They built temples and theaters modeled after Greek prototypes, and developed their own distinctive architecture, columns, arches, aqueducts that would become symbols of Roman ingenuity. As the Republic's institutions matured and its armies expanded, Rome's influence deepened. They fought and defeated neighboring tribes such as the Volsci, the Aequi, and the mighty Carthaginians, famous for their general Hannibal, across a series of conflicts that shaped Rome's destiny. The First Punic War and later Second Punic War were crucial in establishing Rome's dominance over the Western Mediterranean. These triumphs were not just military, they were cultural and political victories as well. Rome's expanding territory meant new lands, new peoples, and new customs. Yet beneath it all, the core identity rooted in the legendary virtues of strength, resilience, and divine favor persisted. The stories of Romulus became anchors for a society rapidly transforming from a city-state into an empire. In this way, Rome's early history, its myths, its heroes, its wars, lay the groundwork for what was to come, an empire that would redefine governance, law, and culture for centuries. And through it all, the legend of Romulus and the ideals of civic duty remained central, inspiring generations of Romans to strive for greatness, just as their ancestors had believed from the very beginning. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into Rome's legendary beginnings, be sure to like and subscribe to stay updated. Up next, we'll explore the Roman Republic,